Hello everyone. In this episode, we are going to learn how to set up Node.js with ExpressJS and Nodemon for a Express-based web application or a REST API. We will begin by setting up the project. So the first step will be initializing the package.json. We do this by executing npm init. So it will ask you for a few options that needs to be configured. These can be set up later too. We'll go with the defaults for most of them. Entry point will set it as server.js. Now that we see that we have our package.json set up, the next step will be to set up the required dependent packages. In this case, we need ExpressJS and Nodemon. First step will be for setting up ExpressJS. So we'll go ahead with that. npm I stands for npm install. It's a short form for that. When we say save, it will set it up as a dependency in package.json. We see that the dependency has been updated in package.json here. The next step will be to set up Nodemon. We will set up Nodemon as a development dependency and not as a application dependency. The reason being that we don't need Nodemon for running the application on a production environment. We'll come to why do we need Nodemon in the next point of discussion. So we will configure Nodemon as a save dev dependency. I'm sorry. We see that Nodemon has been now configured in package.json as a development dependency and not as a actual application dependency. So the application will still function without Nodemon being installed. Now, the next step is to configure server.js. We have defined this server.js as an entry point, and also so we will create a file called server.js. Before we go into setting up the application in server.js, which is the entry point, we would like to configure Nodemon for the development environment. Now the first question that will arise is, why do we need Nodemon? The typical web application or API application development life cycle involves writing code based on the logic that is applicable for any implementation that is being done, and then testing that logic. To test that logic, we need to deploy that code onto the server and restart the server. Now this is a repetitive process during development. So there are two options. The brute force option is you make the changes to your logic or to your API implementation or your web application implementation, restart the server manually. And the other option is, if by some means this can be automated, so that any change that you made to your logic, the server gets automatically restarted to reflect that logic so that you can test whether it is working as expected. And this is where Nodemon comes into picture. This overall life cycle of automated restarting of the server based on any code changes that have been made tremendously improves the overall development turnaround time and helps in reducing the duration that it takes to test your logic and to actually get an implementation of any logic to a production state. So for that, we need it is a very good idea to have NodeMon as part of your development setup. Now that we have the packages installed here, now we need to configure NodeMon. The first step that we need to do is we need to create a file called nodemon.json, which is effectively a configuration file where we can define the options for NodeMon. The first option is watch. Here we can define what folders or files that needs to be watched for any changes. So here we are going to give the current working directory. Okay, since this is a JSON file, we need to put it in curly braces. The next option is exec, which is execute. So what should NodeMon do when it identifies any change in any particular file? So this is where we define the command that NodeMon needs to execute. So here we define the command that Node should execute. So here we say node server.js. The next option that we have is the extensions that NodeMon should watch for, the file extensions. We can define multiple file extensions, separating it by pipes. In this particular case, we are just going to give JS as the file extension. The next option that we have is ignore. Again, this is more for showing the options that are available. We don't need this ignore option for this particular episode. So here we can define the extensions that we can ignore, that NodeMon should ignore while identifying file changes. So here, for the sake of this tutorial, although we don't have any such files, we will give the file extensions as TrueType fonts and PNG files. Yeah. Now we'll go back to package.json, and we don't have any script for us to be able to execute our code in the development environment where NodeMon is being used. For that, we'll set up a script. We'll define a script as dev, and when dev script is executed, what is the command that should be triggered is NodeMon. When NodeMon gets triggered, what NodeMon will do is it will look at the file called nodemon.json, and it will identify the configurations that have been set in place, and then it will execute the server accordingly, execute the reinitiation of the server accordingly. Now this is where we have configured the setup. Now let's get back to server.js. The first step that we need to do, because this is an ExpressJS server setup, we are going to first import let's name it Express. And also let's define a port. Please bear in mind that these are not live sessions, but these are pre-recorded sessions without any editing in mind. So there'll be a lot of typos and there'll be a lot of corrections that will be happening. There is no editing while we publish this. Let's define the port as 8081. and let's create an instance of Express. We will define function for printing out the port. Let's see now what happens when we try to run the application. The way here we have defined a script called dev, which triggers Nodemon. So let's try to execute this particular dev script. The way to do it is npm run dev. Now we see that the server has started and it's listening on port 8081. Now if we go back to server.js and if you were to change the port to 8080 and we save it, as we see here, the server got auto restarted and we did not have to manually restart the server for us to see that change. Now let's add a get function for handling a rudimentary message or a get API call on this port. The way we can do it is yeah, it takes two parameters, request and response, and we shall return response dot send hello world. And if we save it, so has got automatically restarted. Now we go to the server and call 8080 and we see hello world as the message. If we go change the port number, okay, let's not change the port number, let's change the message. If we change the message to from Spinsage, save it. See here, we refresh the page and we can see that the changes have been reflected and we have never restarted the server as such, because Nodemon is monitoring the file changes and it is restarting the server whenever it detects any file changes that it needs to identify and restart the server, as has been defined in nodemon.json. We hope that this tutorial was helpful to you, and please give us a thumbs up, share and subscribe to our channel if this episode was helpful. Also let us know in the comment section or on Instagram if you would like us to create episodes on any particular topic that interests you. For updates, you can follow us on our other social media profiles given in the description below. Thank you all and catch you on the next episode. Thank you.
At Spinsage, we provide digital consultancy services including web and mobile app development. For inquiries, please visit spinsage.com.